Welcome to our channel, your gateway to the most spine-chilling tales and unnerving true stories. Today, we present a story, The Vengeful Doll. Get ready to be on the edge of your seat as we delve into this unsettling narrative. But be warned, comfort is the last thing you'll find here. Jane, a 42-year-old antique doll collector, had always been fascinated by the old toy shop that stood on the corner of her street. The shop was like a museum, housing countless dolls and figurines from different eras and cultures. One day, while strolling past the shop, she decided to step inside and explore its dusty aisles. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a long, gray beard, greeted her warmly and offered her a cup of tea. As they sipped their tea, Jane told him about her passion for doll collecting and her desire to find a unique addition to her collection. The shopkeeper nodded knowingly and led Jane to a section of the shop that was hidden behind a velvet curtain. Inside the curtain, there were several glass cabinets showcasing a collection of porcelain dolls, each more exquisite than the last. The dolls had intricate details, delicate features, and an eerie quality about them that made Jane's heart race. The shopkeeper explained that these dolls were part of a private collection that had been passed down through generations and were rumored to be cursed. Despite the warnings, Jane couldn't resist the allure of the porcelain dolls. After much deliberation, she selected a particular doll that stood out among the rest. It was a beautiful, life-sized porcelain doll dressed in a vintage pink gown, her features delicately painted on her porcelain face. The shopkeeper insisted that she take the doll only after he had warned her about the consequences of bringing it home. Jane paid for the doll and thanked the shopkeeper before hurrying home, her excitement building with every step. Once she arrived home, she carefully placed the doll on her mantelpiece in the living room, admiring its beauty and craftsmanship. As the day turned into night, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. She dismissed the thought, chalking it up to her overactive imagination and the stories she had heard about the doll. That night, Jane woke up to the sound of whispers in the darkness. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and saw the porcelain doll standing at the foot of her bed. Its lifeless eyes seemed to stare straight at her, as if it were trying to communicate something. Trembling with fear, she forced herself to go back to sleep. The next morning, she woke up to find the doll back on the mantelpiece, unharmed. She tried to convince herself that it was all just a bad dream, but deep down, she knew better. Over the next few days, Jane continued to experience strange occurrences around the house. The doll would move around the room while she was sleeping, its whispers growing louder and more menacing. One afternoon, she found the doll in her bed, its cold porcelain fingers entwined in her hair. Enraged, she grabbed the doll and locked it in a small, dark cupboard in her bedroom. The next morning, however, the doll was back on her bed, unharmed and seemingly unperturbed by its ordeal. As the days passed, Jane's fear grew into a deep-seated unease. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the doll to appear around the corner. The whispers in the night had become so loud that she often found it difficult to sleep. One night, she awoke with a start, certain that she heard the doll laughing maniacally in the darkness. Shivering with fear, she lit a candle and searched the room, but the doll was nowhere to be found. Jane knew that she couldn't ignore the doll's presence any longer. She had to confront it and put an end to its malicious behavior. With a deep breath, she opened the cupboard and grabbed the doll, determined to dispose of it once and for all. As she held the doll in her arms, she felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if the doll were somehow connected to her on a deeper level. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it, no matter how much danger she knew it posed. In the end, Jane decided to seal the doll in a box and store it in the attic, far away from her daily life. She knew that she couldn't get rid of it entirely, but at least she could try to keep it out of harm's way. As she climbed the creaky stairs to the attic, she felt the weight of the doll's presence pressing down on her shoulders. Despite her fear, she forced herself to continue, determined to find a way to break the curse that had been placed upon them both. Years passed, and Jane continued to live with the porcelain doll in the attic. She never forgot the day she brought it home, nor the terror she had experienced in its presence. She knew that the doll was cursed, but she also knew that somehow they were connected. She spent her days researching ways to lift the curse, but to no avail. In the end, Jane resigned herself to living with the porcelain doll, knowing that it was a part of her now, for better or for worse. And so, Jane continued to live her life, forever haunted by the whispering porcelain doll that she could never truly escape. The curse seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, but she refused to give in to its power. Instead, she chose to face it head-on, knowing that somehow she would find a way to break the curse and finally be free from its grasp. Jane's first instinct after the paranormal investigator's visit was to rid herself of the accursed doll once and for all. She found a trusted friend who owned a rundown cabin in the woods, far from civilization. There, she could safely burn the doll without any unwanted attention or interference. The journey to the cabin was a harrowing one. The closer they got, the more Jane could feel the doll's malevolent presence growing stronger. Her friend, unaware of the true nature of their errand, kept glancing at her with concern. But Jane could not bring herself to confess the truth. She was too afraid of what her friend might think. They finally arrived at the cabin late at night. The air was cold and crisp, the stars twinkling in the inky black sky. Jane led her friend to a clearing near the cabin, where a large bonfire already crackled and spat embers. She placed the doll carefully atop a pile of kindling, feeling a mixture of relief and dread wash over her. Her friend, sensing her friend's apprehension, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be all right," he assured her, misunderstanding the true nature of her fear. "We'll get rid of this thing, and you'll be able to get some rest." Jane nodded, trying to convince herself of his words. She watched as her friend lit a match, the flames dancing in his hands. He leaned forward and touched the match to the kindling beneath the doll. The fire roared to life, engulfing the doll in a fierce inferno. For a brief moment, Jane thought she saw a dark shape fluttering within the flames, as if the doll were trying to escape. But it was only her imagination, she told herself. There was no way the thing could have survived. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the sight, and focused on the sound of the fire crackling and popping. Hours passed, and the fire finally began to die down. Jane and her friends sat on a log nearby, sipping from mugs of steaming coffee, watching the embers glow red and orange in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and pine. Jane felt a sense of finality wash over her, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "You sure you don't want to come inside?" her friend asked, glancing at her sympathetically. "It's cold out here." Jane hesitated, unsure if she was ready to leave the doll behind. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "I think I just need a little more time." They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. Jane could feel the doll's presence fading, as if it had been drawn back into the shadows from which it came. As the last embers died out, she stood up, stretched, and made her way back to the cabin. Her friend followed behind her, casting one more worried glance in her direction. Inside the cabin, Jane collapsed onto the bed, exhausted from the events of the night. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images of the fire and the doll. But try as she might, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. There was an emptiness inside her now, a hollowness that the doll had once filled. She wondered if she would ever be truly free of its influence. The next day, they packed up the car and began the journey back home. Jane tried to convince herself that everything was going to be all right, that she had finally put an end to the nightmare. But as they drove through the countryside, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was somehow still watching her, still waiting for its chance to strike. Jane's research into the porcelain doll's history takes her on a harrowing journey through the annals of time. She discovers that the doll once belonged to a young girl named Elizabeth, who lived during the 18th century. Elizabeth was the cherished daughter of a wealthy merchant and his first wife. When the merchant remarried a cruel and vain woman, Elizabeth's life became a living hell. Her stepmother, consumed with jealousy, subjected the innocent girl to years of physical and emotional abuse. Desperate for escape, Elizabeth confided in her only friend, the porcelain doll she had received as a gift on her 6th birthday. As the abuse escalated, the stepmother grew increasingly paranoid and suspicious. One day, she accused Elizabeth of plotting against her and locked her in the attic. Left alone and terrified, Elizabeth clutched her beloved doll for comfort. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. In a fit of rage, the stepmother summoned a local witch, desperate to be rid of the girl. The witch cast a dark spell on the doll, cursing it to seek vengeance on anyone who dared to harm Elizabeth. As the witch's words echoed through the room, a chill ran down Jane's spine. She now understood the malevolent force that had been terrorizing her home. Determined to put an end to the doll's curse, Jane sought the help of a local historian who specialized in the occult. The historian confirmed her suspicions and warned her that breaking the curse would not be an easy task. They would need to travel to the abandoned mansion where Elizabeth had died and perform a powerful ritual to release her spirit from the doll. As they traveled to the mansion, Jane and the historian exchanged nervous glances. The dilapidated building looms ominously before them, its crumbling walls and creaking floorboards echoing with the whispers of long-dead spirits. They entered the attic where Elizabeth had spent her final moments, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. The historian begins the ritual, chanting ancient incantations and waving burning sage. Jane feels a strange energy coursing through her veins as the air around them crackles with power. As the final words of the ritual echo through the room, a brilliant light fills the attic. When it fades, they see Elizabeth's spirit standing before them, her once beautiful face now etched with sadness and loss. Elizabeth thanks them for setting her free and promises to find peace. Before she departs, she confesses that the curse was meant for her stepmother, not for those who would help her. With this, she fades away, leaving behind only a faint whisper of sadness. As they leave the mansion, Jane and the historian exchange solemn glances. They both know that the curse has been broken, but the memories and the fear it has instilled in Jane will linger for a long time to come. Jane decides to donate the doll to a museum, ensuring that its dark history will never be forgotten. And with that, she begins the long process of healing and moving on with her life. Jane, still shaken by the events that had transpired since her purchase of the cursed doll, made her way to the small village where the tragic murder had taken place centuries ago. The air was thick with an ominous silence, as if the very earth itself remembered the atrocity that had once stained its soil. She followed the directions provided by the ancient book, guiding her steps to the outskirts of the village where the stepmother's grave lay hidden beneath a lone, weather-beaten tree. As she drew closer, Jane felt a chill run down her spine. The air seemed to thicken, and the rustling of leaves in the wind sounded unnaturally sinister. Gently, she brushed aside the overgrowth that obscured the tombstone, revealing the name Eleanor etched into the stone. A shiver ran through her as she recalled the stepmother's name from the book. It was here, she was certain, that she would find a way to free the doll's tormented spirit and put an end to its vengeful rampage. Jane knelt before the grave, her fingers trembling as she opened the book. Its yellowed pages were filled with arcane symbols and ancient script, but she forced herself to focus, reading aloud the words that would grant her the power to release the doll's spirit. As she spoke the final incantation, a faint glow emanated from the book, bathing her in an ethereal light. The air grew still, as if time itself had stopped for a moment. Slowly, Jane felt a sense of peace wash over her. The whispers in the night grew faint, and the shadows that had once haunted her every movement began to recede. It was over. The curse had been broken. With a heavy heart, she rose to her feet, gathering the remnants of the porcelain doll from the ground where it lay shattered. She would see to it that the doll was buried with its owner, finally able to find the rest it had so desperately sought. As Jane made her way back to her car, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The weight of the doll's vengeance had been lifted from her shoulders, and she could finally begin to move on with her life. She drove away from the village, leaving the haunted memories behind her, and vowed never again to seek out the darkness that lurked in the shadows. The sun dipped below the horizon as Jane pulled into her driveway, casting a warm glow over her home. She stepped inside, taking in the familiar scent of her favorite candles and the cozy feel of her well-worn furniture. With a sigh of contentment, she set the remains of the doll on the mantelpiece, where it belonged. It was time to start anew. As she settled into her favorite chair, Jane couldn't help but feel a newfound appreciation for the simple things in life. The creak of the floorboards, the gentle hum of the television in the background, the soft rustle of the curtains in the breeze. In that moment, she knew that she had truly escaped the clutches of the cursed doll, and that her life could finally begin again. She smiled to herself, closing her eyes as she leaned back in her chair. The events of the past few weeks seemed like a distant nightmare, fading into the recesses of her mind. With the help of the book and the stepmother's final resting place, she had set the doll's spirit free. Now, it was time to move on, to embrace the future with open arms. Jane opened her eyes, taking in the familiar sights around her. A sense of peace and contentment washed over her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at home. The curse was over, and she was finally free. As she sat there, lost in thought, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the old woman who had given her the book, for the stepmother's restless spirit that had guided her, and for the strength she had found within herself to confront the darkness. Most of all, she was grateful for the chance to start anew, to begin again with a clean slate. She glanced over at the mantelpiece, where the remnants of the doll sat, almost as if they were a reminder of everything she had been through. And yet, somehow, they also served as a testament to her courage and resilience. She had faced her fears and emerged victorious, stronger and wiser than before. With a deep breath, Jane stood up, stretching her arms above her head. There was still so much of the world to explore, so many people to meet, and so many experiences to be had. The future was hers for the taking, and she intended to make the most of it. She walked over to the mantelpiece, picking up the book and flipping through its weathered pages one last time. Then, with a gentle sigh, she placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. It had served its purpose, and now it was time to move on. Jane turned back to the room, her gaze falling on the photograph of her parents that hung on the wall. They had always been her rock, her support system, and now, more than ever, she felt their presence guiding her through the uncertain terrain of life. With a renewed sense of determination, she walked over to the photo and gently ran her fingers over their smiling faces. From this day forward, she vowed, she would live her life to the fullest, cherishing every moment and every memory. The curse was over, and she was finally free to embrace the future with open arms. The world was her oyster, and she intended to make the most of it. As the night fell outside her window, Jane climbed into bed, pulling the soft blankets up to her chin. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world slip away, and drifted off into a peaceful sleep, dreaming of the adventures that lay ahead. The curse was over, and the world was hers for the taking. Jane sat cross-legged on the cold, hardwood floor of her study, surrounded by a circle of candles that flickered eerily in the draft. The ancient book lay open before her, its yellowed pages illuminated by the soft, amber glow of a single candle. She had spent weeks researching and translating the arcane text, and now, on the anniversary of the girl's death, she was finally ready to perform the ritual that would release the porcelain doll's tormented spirit. Her heart raced with fear and anticipation as she placed the first of the ritual's ingredients within the circle, a handful of dried lavender, symbolizing peace and purity. Next came a pinch of powdered silver, to represent the moon's reflective power and the feminine aspect of the divine. A single, perfect white rose, plucked from her garden that morning, signified love and devotion, and a vial of holy water from the local church would help to banish any malevolent forces that might still linger. Jane paused, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. The whispers had grown louder in recent days, as if the doll's spirit were drawing closer, desperate for release. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the doll standing behind her, watching her every move. But the mantelpiece remained empty, and the doll's music box remained silent. Perhaps the ritual would work, perhaps it wouldn't. Either way, she had to try. As she began to chant the ancient words, The air in the room seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets and long-buried memories. The candle flames danced and swayed in response to an unseen wind, and shadows crept across the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. Jane's heart raced as she felt the power of the ritual coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to remain focused, to trust in the ancient knowledge that had brought her here. The final words of the incantation echoed through the room, and a blinding light filled the study, brighter than any light Jane had ever seen. She felt as though she were being consumed by a fire, burning away all her fear and doubt. When the light finally faded, she found herself slumped against the bookcase, panting for air. For a moment, she didn't dare to hope that the ritual had worked. Slowly, she forced herself to sit up and look around the room. The candles had gone out, leaving the study bathed in the soft, golden glow of the setting sun. The air felt cleaner, clearer, as if some great weight had been lifted from the world. When she turned to the mantelpiece, she found it empty. The porcelain doll was gone. Tentatively, she stood and walked over to the fireplace. Peering into the ashes, she saw no charred remains of the doll, no evidence that it had ever been there. She knew, with a deep certainty, that it was gone. The spirit of the young girl had finally found peace, and the curse had been lifted. For a long moment, Jane stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, overwhelmed with a sense of relief and accomplishment. She had faced down the darkness and emerged victorious. She had saved herself, and perhaps even saved the world. As the last vestiges of the ritual's power faded from her body, she knew that she would never be the same. But she was finally free. Jane spent the next few weeks in a state of shock, unable to process what had happened to her and her life. The porcelain doll, once a source of fascination and curiosity, now represented nothing but terror and fear. She found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, feeling the weight of its malevolent gaze upon her even when it was nowhere to be seen. It was clear to her that she needed to find a way to put the doll's spirit to rest, to release herself from its malevolent grasp and find some semblance of peace once more. After much consideration, Jane decided that the best course of action would be to donate the doll to a museum, where its dark history and the tragic story behind it could be properly documented and studied. This way, the curse could be lifted, and the doll's spirit could finally find the rest it so desperately sought. Jane reached out to several museums, explaining the doll's history and her own experiences with it. To her surprise, she received several offers almost immediately. One museum, located in a quaint town on the outskirts of the city, seemed particularly interested. They had extensive experience in handling antique dolls and were eager to add the porcelain doll to their collection. It took several weeks for the necessary paperwork to be processed and for the museum to arrange transportation for the doll. During this time, Jane found herself constantly checking in on the doll, almost as if she were afraid that something might happen to it before it could be safely removed from her possession. Finally, the day arrived when the museum's curator came to pick up the doll. Jane watched as the man carefully wrapped the doll in layers of bubble wrap and placed it into a sturdy cardboard box. He then loaded it into his car and drove away, presumably to its new home. As the car disappeared from sight, Jane couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. Over the next few weeks, Jane began to slowly return to her normal life. She started going out more often, reconnecting with old friends, and even began to think about starting a new hobby. The shadows that had once loomed large in her life now seemed to have been banished, replaced by a newfound sense of hope and resilience. One day, Jane received a letter from the curator of the museum. Inside, he enclosed a photo of the porcelain doll on display in the museum's newest exhibit. The letter explained that the exhibit was dedicated to the history of cursed objects and the people who had been affected by them, and that the doll had become one of the museum's most popular attractions. Jane felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness as she looked at the photo. While she was glad that the doll had found a new home where its story could be properly told, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for the time when it had been a part of her life. As the years passed, Jane continued to visit the museum whenever she had the chance. Each time she saw the porcelain doll on display, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. The exhibit had become a sort of shrine to their shared experience, a testament to the power of perseverance and the strength of the human spirit. And although the doll would always hold a special place in her heart, Jane knew that it was finally at peace, free from the torment that had plagued it for centuries. The museum acquires the doll and puts it on display in a special exhibit about cursed objects. The exhibit is a massive success, drawing in curious onlookers and paranormal enthusiasts from all over the world. As word of the doll's story spreads, Jane becomes an instant celebrity, her face plastered across magazines and newspapers. She is invited to speak at conferences and write articles about her experiences, becoming something of an expert in the field of paranormal investigation. Her newfound fame is both exhilarating and disorienting. She is constantly surrounded by people who want to hear her story, but she finds herself longing for the anonymity she once knew. She misses her quiet life, filled with antique dolls and the occasional visit to her local bookstore. However, she knows that her experiences with the cursed doll have given her a unique perspective on the world, and she feels a responsibility to share her knowledge with others. The museum's exhibit is designed to be both educational and chilling. The room is dimly lit, with a spotlight trained on the glass case that holds the porcelain doll. A recorded voiceover narrates Jane's story, beginning with her chance encounter at the old toy shop and ending with her successful ritual to release the doll's spirit. As visitors wander through the exhibit, they can see other cursed objects from throughout history, a haunted mirror, a demonic painting, and even a cursed book that is said to drive its readers insane. One day, as Jane is giving a tour of the exhibit, she notices a young girl standing transfixed in front of the doll's display case. The girl's eyes are wide with fascination and fear, and she seems to be fighting back tears. Jane approaches her, sensing that she might have something to say. The girl introduces herself as Lily, and reveals that she too has been experiencing strange occurrences in her home. Her stepmother has been growing increasingly distant and cold, and Lily suspects that something sinister is afoot. Jane listens intently to Lily's story, her heart racing as she recognizes the familiar signs of a cursed object at work. She takes Lily aside and shares her own experiences, offering her words of encouragement and advice. Together, they devise a plan to confront Lily's stepmother and uncover the truth behind the haunting. As they work together, Jane and Lily form an unlikely bond. They find strength in each other's company, and Jane begins to see a glimmer of hope in her new role as mentor. She realizes that she doesn't have to face the darkness alone, and that there are others out there who share her passion for understanding the mysteries of the supernatural. The day finally arrives when they confront Lily's stepmother. Jane's years of experience in dealing with cursed objects prove invaluable, and they manage to uncover the truth. Lily's stepmother had been using a cursed amulet to manipulate her surroundings and drive a wedge between her and Lily. With the amulet destroyed, peace is finally restored to Lily's home. As they leave the house, Jane turns to Lily and smiles. "You know," she says, "I think you've got what it takes to be a great paranormal investigator. You're brave, clever, and you've got a real gift for seeing the truth behind the lies." Lily blushes, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Maybe," she says softly, "maybe one day I'll be able to help someone the way you helped me." And so, Jane continues her work at the museum, using her newfound fame and expertise to guide and inspire others. But in her heart, she knows that her greatest accomplishment will always be the friendship she forged with Lily, and the knowledge that together, they were able to face the darkness and emerge unscathed. As the years passed, Jane found herself unable to shake the profound impact the Vengeful Doll had on her life. The memories of its malice and the girl it had once belonged to became inextricably intertwined with her identity, serving as a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within the world. Yet, it was not an entirely unsettling thought. If anything, it gave her a sense of purpose. A drive to help others who found themselves tangled in the web of the supernatural. Jane became a sought-after speaker at paranormal conferences, her reputation for bravery and knowledge preceding her. She shared her story with countless audiences, imparting the lessons she had learned and offering hope to those who felt they were alone in their struggles. Through her work, she met other like-minded individuals who had experienced their own encounters with the supernatural, and together, they formed a close-knit community. Among her many acquaintances was a young man named David, who had been plagued by hauntings since childhood. The spirits that visited him were not malicious, but rather lost and confused, unable to move on to whatever lay beyond. David had spent years trying to find a way to help them, and when he heard Jane speak at a conference, he knew that she was the only person who could understand what he was going through. Jane listened intently as David shared his story, nodding along in understanding. She knew that the spirits were not malevolent, and that they simply needed someone to guide them to the light. Drawing on her own experiences and the knowledge she had gained over the years, she devised a plan to help David communicate with the spirits and assist them in finding peace. The two of them traveled to a remote, tranquil island, where they could work undisturbed. Over the course of several weeks, they held seances and engaged in rituals designed to help the spirits cross over. As the days passed, Jane could see the weight lifting from David's shoulders, and she knew that their efforts were not in vain. Finally, on the last night of their stay, the spirits all disappeared, their tasks completed. Jane and David returned home, their bond strengthened by their shared experience. They continued to work together, using their unique skills to help others who found themselves caught between the worlds of the living and the dead. Their work was not always easy, but they found solace in knowing that they were making a difference. Years passed, and Jane's reputation continued to grow. She became a sought-after expert in the field of paranormal investigation, and her work took her to all corners of the globe. Yet, despite her success, she never forgot the lessons she had learned from the Vengeful Doll and the girl it had once belonged to. These lessons served as a constant reminder of the power of courage and determination in the face of the unknown, and they continued to inspire her as she journeyed deeper into the mysterious realm of the supernatural. One day, Jane received a letter from a young woman named Lily, who had inherited a cursed amulet from her late grandmother. The amulet was said to bring misfortune and suffering to anyone who wore it, and Lily was desperate to rid herself of its curse. She had heard of Jane's expertise in such matters and implored her for help. Jane read the letter with a heavy heart, remembering all too well the burden she had carried for so long after encountering the Vengeful Doll. Yet, she knew that she could not turn Lily away. She packed her bags and set off to meet Lily, determined to help her break the curse and free herself from its malevolent influence. As they journeyed to the remote village where the amulet had originated, Jane and Lily grew closer, bonding over their shared experiences and fears. They faced numerous obstacles along the way, but Jane's knowledge and Lily's courage saw them through. Eventually, they reached the heart of the curse, and with a combination of ancient rituals and their own determination, they were able to break its hold. As the final rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, Jane and Lily stood together, watching as the amulet shattered into 1,000 pieces, its power forever destroyed. They embraced, tears streaming down their faces, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. Jane knew that she would never forget the girl who had once worn the amulet, or the bond they had shared, however brief it might have been. She also knew that, in some small way, she had managed to make amends for the suffering she had endured all those years ago. As they walked away from the ruins of the amulet, Jane felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing that she had helped to free another soul from the shackles of the supernatural. From that day forward, Jane and Lily remained close friends, their lives intertwined by the shared experience of facing down the darkness that lurked in the shadows. Together, they continued to help others who found themselves caught in the web of the supernatural, using their knowledge and courage to guide them to safety and offer hope in the face of the unknown. Thank you so much for joining me on this cinematic journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Have you experienced a spine-chilling horror that left you trembling? Share your terrifying tale with us by emailing nightmarenetwork@hotmail.com, and we'd be thrilled to feature it on our platform. Until next time, happy movie watching.